How's everybody feeling? You feeling all right?
Yeah.
One more time. You feeling all right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's such an honor to be here at GLEX and in the midst of so many great talks and wonderful moments. Before I came here, what I had heard was the best thing about GLEX is that we as explorers get to have some time together. You go to things like ECAD, you go to some of these great other things, and they're so fast, everybody's moving. Here's a time when we can sit down and kind of marinate our thoughts together, and a lot of good stuff comes of that. So it's been an honor to sit and meet so many new people, and just have so many friends, colleagues, and enemies of mine under one roof is just amazing. No, I'm just kidding, no enemies. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Justin Fornal, and I have what I think many of you have, which is called the explorer's disease. And that means that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, I am filled with insatiable curiosity and unquenchable wonder to experience everything that this beautiful world of ours has to offer. And so with that being said, my friends who are living here on the Azores, if there's any secret tunnels, if there's any local food I should try, I need rare textiles, I fly out tomorrow morning, so don't be afraid to slide in my DMs and take me on an expedition tonight. I will be prepared. So what we're going to talk about a little bit is vanishing cultures around the world. And then we're going to slide into why it's even more important that we do this in some crisis areas. So think about the clothes we're wearing right now. We look around the room, I see some blues, some yellows, some purples. I see a lot of cotton. I see some rayon. If we're to go back 100, 150 years, everything we would be wearing would be coming from the natural world. And some of your colors would be very, very expensive. If you're wearing purple, perhaps it would be extracted from snails. If you're wearing yellow, perhaps it would actually be from cow urine, and those cows had eaten mango leaves. If you're wearing red, perhaps you're wearing something that was dyed using the cochineal scale insect that dines on the nopal cactus, and its karmic acid in its body makes this beautiful red dye, which is at one time was the most expensive color on the planet. But we're living in a time that's synthetic, and it's convenient, and it's fast. So why? Why the ancient world? Well, think about, recently went to Uganda, to a place called Buyaga, and met with my friends of the Buganda people. And there they still make an ancient textile, bark cloth. This is the inner layer of the matuba tree. It takes a very long process to make, where they're cutting off the bark and they're hammering it out. Everyone's working in unison to make this one piece of fabric. Well, why wear that? Why wear that when we could just go to a store and get something cotton, something convenient, something lightweight that breathes, maybe even slimmerizing? Because to wear that, when they wear that cloth, if the kabaka, the chief, is coming to their village, they wear that to honor the pre-colonial ways. When someone dies, they're wrapped in 7 layers of this bark cloth, because when they ascend, the ancestors won't recognize the cotton. The ancestors will not recognize the polo shirt. The ancestors will recognize the pre-colonial fabric. And that's the bark cloth. And those are the things that we cannot lose on this planet. So as we talk about, I've had the honor of working for some great places, National Geographic, Discovery Channel, and oftentimes I've wanted to tell the stories where kind of the footprints of whispers of the ancient world still exist. But a lot of times, these are in places that they didn't want to insure those trips. They were a little concerned. And even more so, I went to a few other institutions and I said, I've got some great stories in some places that I want to tell. And the answers that I've often got, well, isn't there a famine there? I'm like, no, that was 40 years ago. Isn't there a genocide there? No, that was 22 years ago. Well, isn't it an active war zone? No, that was 10 years ago. And they said, but if you're not, why would you go there then? And that's when I saw that so many places on our map around the world have been typecast. At Western media, we're not allowed to tell good stories about what is perceived as bad places. And that's when I knew that I had to go on my own and with some friends and start an organization called the History, Arts, and Science Action Network. I think this slide will work. And we'll just show a little bit of what we do.
The History, Arts, and Science Action Network is a 501c3
that bridges the arts, humanities, and science to provide a highly interdisciplinary approach to the preservation of cultural heritage throughout the world. By teaming up with local storytellers, filmmakers, traditional artisans, and community elders, our field team ensures that remote and underserved communities in crisis are provided with a global platform to reclaim their personal narrative and showcase their heritage. Cultural preservation begins with cultural celebration.
Okay, so this is our organization. We got together, explorers, academics, and we're still growing. So everyone in this room, I look forward to your contributions. But as I am going to put a 2-hour lecture into 15 minutes, we'll get along to some of our more challenging expeditions. So once again, we have a bunch of different projects we're working on, but really where my passion has been is going into areas that you could either call a conflict zone, a crisis zone, or a hot zone. So in these areas, these are once again places that media does not want to go unless it's just really to talk about tragedy. And it does want to talk about the cultures there. But even within these framework of places, certainly you have smaller groups. And when I'm looking for a story, it's usually people like, well, where do you get your ideas from? A lot of times it's a footnote. It's one sentence in a big book. And when I was reading about Somalia, I read about the clan system and the history and frankincense and the land of Punt. But then I also read about minority clans. And there was only a few sentences talking about these small groups that are very isolated in Somalia, and they're looked down upon. So if we think about the Somali clan system, you have these larger, more powerful clans who work together and have great communities, but then you also have these ostracized communities. And I was trying to figure out why. So we went there and we launched an expedition. Luke Hardy, member of the Explorers Club, got behind this expedition and funded it. And we started to sit down because we thought all the information I was seeing about these groups was told by outside researchers. And most of it was from over 100 years ago. So you can imagine things have changed. And never did I see a place where they were able to tell their own story. So we thought it was important to sit down with them and let them tell us their history, their oral history from their perspective. One of the groups we met with was the Tomal. And the Tomal, they are born into blacksmithing. This is what they do from the day they're born to the day they die, and they're not allowed to do anything else. We sat down with members of this clan, we saw their techniques, but we also heard their stories and their songs. And these were songs that, as far as I know, have not been recorded before. And most of their songs were about, I'm born into this clan, and if I leave this clan, I will die. I will be killed. So it's just very interesting to hear that even their perspective, their world perspective, was very much about being locked within this clan system. But the real reason we went there, in the title of our film on the subject, Learning from the Yibir, was to meet the Yibir. So what I had heard about the Yibir, what I had read about them very briefly, because there wasn't much to find out, was the Yibir are one of the minority clans of Somalia who are perceived as sorcerers, magicians. They often have prejudice against them because they're believed to be ancient Jewish people. So when we went there, the thing that really got me, that I found really fascinating, was that if you see this small item, this is called a samayo, and this is a talismanic item, and that traditionally, when a male child is born, a person from an upper clan will seek out a Yibir on the street and pay them to give them one of these samayos. And I said, now, this is a person you wouldn't look at daily, you certainly wouldn't have lunch with them, but you have a child born and you're going to bring them money to make you something to put on your child's neck. So we were very fortunate to sit down with King Warsame. He considers himself the leader of the minority clans of the Horn of Africa, a brilliant man, and once again, very in touch with the ancient ways, uses of plants, uses of animals that have not been recorded. And I sat down and I said, please tell me why. Why is it that people will still pay for this? He said, well, we are the indigenous people of Somalia. Before Islam, we were here. And we were here hundreds of years ago. And what the story is, we had a leader outside of what is now Hargeisa, named Muhammad Hanif. And then a gentleman named the Dear One, who was an Islamic cleric, came up to him and he said, Muhammad Hanif, I call you to battle, a spiritual battle. So the two men faced off. And this was the ancient religion of Waka, and this was Islam. And he said, Muhammad Hanif, is your God powerful enough to put you on top of that hill over there? He said, of course. Snapped his fingers, appeared on top of the hill and came back. He said, Muhammad Hanif, is your God powerful enough to put you inside that hill? He looked around, of course, snapped his fingers, he was inside the hill. At which point the Dear One said, Allah, lock this wicked king in the hill. He was killed. Now usually there would be a blood oath that had to be paid, but it was not paid. So that hundreds of years later, this is still being paid. And I said, but why? What is the significance of this? He goes, well, when we were rulers, when my ancient, indigenous people were king, when a baby was born, you'd have to pay a tax, and we'd give you a receipt. When someone was married, you'd pay a tax, we'd give a receipt. He said, this is still the receipt, and they're repaying the blood oath to this day. And I said, what's fascinating to me is that even though this is not a system or a God that people allegedly believe in, they still are afraid enough that they're still paying this. And so it's a very interesting dialogue and interesting conversation that indigenous spiritual practices, although have largely been erased around the world by larger religions, they are still there in the form of whispers and footprints. But you have to look for the clues and be patient and have conversations, and they will reveal themselves. So with our film, we were looking for a little bit more of how this is affected in modern day society. So we went to Dolo, Somalia to report on kind of how people are being impacted by the famine and the drought. We met this couple. This man is Yibber, and she is from the higher up Isak clan. They were married, and they had a baby, and her family found out that he was actually not from the clan he said he was. He was from this other clan, and they tried to kill him and her. So he was stabbed, he escaped. She was pregnant at the time. They forced her to have an abortion. They locked her up in the house for a number of months, and she was tortured. They were able to escape, meet up, and as opposed to stay in Hargeisa or Sasso, they fled and have been living in this camp. We helped them relocate, and if you watch our film, you'll see how things worked out for them. So now let's talk about Ethiopia. So we went to Ethiopia a few times looking to find who was remaining of the Beta Israel. So the Beta Israel are people of the Jewish faith who are Ethiopian. Many of them were relocated during the late 1970s, early 80s to Israel. So 2 years ago, we went to Gondar, and we were looking to find some of the community that was there. Everyone we met, even though their traditional crafts were pottery and blacksmithing, once again, and the people we found, they were actually Christian and said, well, we were apprentices of the Beta Israel before we left. And we said, we miss them, they haven't been here. And we kept going around the area trying to find if there was any Beta Israel left. Just 2 months ago, we went back, and we went to an area called Debre Berhan. And there we did find a bustling community of Beta Israel who said, well, we're living in secrecy. You've been brought to us, and we know you're a friend, but if we meet someone on the street, we will not say that we are Jewish. And they'll say, we actually have a temple, we'd love to take you there, but because there's a little bit of a localized conflict in the area, we were not able to get to that temple. So the piece in the middle, just to show you a little bit of that, some of the prejudice that prevail even 30 to 40 years later is, that gentleman is holding a piece of hyena fur. This is at a market in Gondar. One of the beliefs that against the Beta Israel is that they are Buddha, especially the blacksmith. Many cultures that I've researched, the person who transforms the metal is oftentimes thought to be able to transform their own body. So the Jewish blacksmiths in the Beta Israel by the outside community were often considered to be Buddha or wear hyenas. And it was thought that they could transform into hyenas at night, and they would come to your house and stand over you or stand over your children and get you sick. So I saw this in the market, and I knew what it was, but of course, doing the research, I said, sir, what is this that you're selling? He said, this is a piece of hyena fur. And I said, what would I use this for? He goes, well, this will protect you against the Buddha. And this was an area, like I said, there was no more of the Beta Israel in this area, but that superstition had prevailed, and he had a very serious belief that I would need this if I was going to stay in the area. So talking about Iraq. What really got me into exploration was Western civilization, 6th grade, hearing about hearing about the Hanging Gardens of Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon. But these were places that I wanted to go that certainly you could see the archaeology, but to see the culture, the people, the places, it wasn't there anymore. But there were, once again, whispers and footprints. So we wanted to go there. What people don't know about Iraq, most people don't know about Iraq, it's one of the most diverse places in the world. And when I talk about diversity, I talk about ancient diversity. I talk about spiritual practices that have been there for thousands of years, cultures that have been there for thousands of years, and many of them are getting close to being on their last generation. So we've had a great team. My friend Saad Saloom is a human rights activist, really the world authority on minorities in Iraq. We have my friend Mirza Denaya. He's also a Yazidi activist. He's in the north. My friend Niga Salam down at the end. And our friend Dr. Thor Yosef, who is Afro-Basrari, and she's considered the absolute academic of the Afro-Basrari people. And our friend Raymond Pagnucco, who did some great camera work. So our project there is called the Garden in Sinjar. And what we're doing is, in the north, there is a house of coexistence where we are gathering plants from all the different groups, all the ethnicities, all the spiritual beliefs within Iraq. Each of this will give us a plant, and we're taking it to the Garden of Coexistence. This will be a place where we can see that all these different groups, all these different beliefs can coexist in a garden together. And as we've sat down with our team and we've built out this project, we realize that oil is not the greatest natural resource within Iraq. The cultural diversity is. And the ability for Iraq to be within 20 years a world-class tourist destination where people can go and celebrate these different cultures if the right steps are taken. So a few of the groups that we've been working with, one is the Mandaeans. The Mandaeans are thought to be the last Gnostic sect. Some say that they're descendants of the Sabians. Their belief, their central figure is John the Baptist. And every Sunday, they go to the Tigris River and they actually get baptized. And this is something that's happening in Baghdad right now. These groups will come down in these white cloaks and they'll get baptized in the Tigris. But so many of them have left, and there's less than 2,000 remaining in Iraq because of ongoing war, civil strife. And some of them are relocating, and the more we've interviewed people, we said, well, we're happy our family's in the diaspora, but to truly be Mandaean, you have to be here. This is the water, this is the land. And this is something we're going to see recurring, is that although it is nice that people can get out of the conflict zone, when they do leave and they relocate to Washington, D.C. or Toronto, the true culture, the culture is the land, the culture is the place, it dissipates, it vaporizes into the ether. Another group we met, of course, really considered one of the oldest groups in Iraq, is the Mandan, who proudly claim descendants from the Sumerians. And here we are in the wetlands, an area that is believed by many to be the original Garden of Eden. So these marshlands have been reduced by climate change. Starting in the 1950s, a bunch of projects were done to drain the area. And they went down to, during the time of Saddam Hussein, they went down to 90% of them were destroyed. Although there's been many efforts to rehabilitate them and rehydrate these lands, 12,000 square acres is only down to 3,000 square acres. This is my friend Abu. He's a community elder. He is someone who's trying to keep these traditions alive. And he said, look, so many of my family members have moved to Basra. They've moved to Baghdad. They've become city people. He goes, our culture is the Madhif. Our culture is Maskuf. It's these things that are here. We have to, all these houses, this house is completely made out of reeds that are growing in these marshlands. He says he can't do that in the city. He goes, our culture is the marsh, and the marsh is our culture. And if that's gone, this culture that's been here for 5,000 years, making these houses estimated the same way they were 5,000 years ago, could be gone in a matter of decades. The Afro-Basrari. Afro-Basrari were brought here as enslaved people over 1,000 years ago from East Africa. Dr. Thor Yosef, been working with her, and she has so many valuable cultural traditions, and music is such a big part of it. And as we sat down, she told me, she said, we have these songs that we've been singing for generation upon generation, but we're singing them phonetically. We don't know what language it's actually in. This is an ancient tongue, and we're singing it. So she's been working with people in Kenya to try to figure out which dialect they're actually singing so they could actually know what these songs are. And finally, the Yazidi. So the Yazidi is a group living near Sinjar, and they worship a god named Tawushi Melek. And this is a peacock angel. Now, this is just an example of what happens here in so many parts of the world within minority groups. This spirit, this peacock angel, has been misinterpreted and weaponized by ISIS, Daesh, when they did their campaign of terror. And they said that, well, these are devil worshippers. So we must destroy them. And thus began one of many Yazidi genocides. When we visited Sinjar, we saw how many temples were destroyed. We spoke with families, talks of mass rape, mass murder, children, men, women, children destroyed, lives destroyed, and only now are people really starting to come back to Sinjar and rebuild. And you can see this is Sinjar here. We have the Yazidi Genocide Memorial. And here's my friend Mirza, who's been working so hard to help rebuild with his community. And so when I'm talking to Saad, I'm talking to Mirza, and they're telling me, they said, there's such an element of fear within these cultures that as we're translating these verses and these poems and these songs into Arabic and English for the first time in history, we know they're not translating everything because they're afraid that these things will be weaponized against them when the next ISIS rises. And as you see, one thing he told me too is about infrastructure and kind of rebuilding. And when we're talking to people and they're saying, well, what's left to explore? And I say, when you see the beauty and the destruction behind me, we have to realize that so much history, while it has occurred, has not been recorded. It's been spoken, but it has not been written. And it's our duty to come together as people who do have a platform, do have a stage to get out there and get this recorded before it could be destroyed forever. So we were fortunate enough, Mirza was talking to me and he said, look, what I really need is we need solar power because we're off the grid here and we're trying to build this. And in January, I was approached by a solar power company, ironically enough, who said, we want you to be our Explore in Residence. We're interested in telling stories. I said, well, we're interested in solar power. And we started talking. And this company is Energia, and so just within the last 3 months, we've already had several expeditions, and we're going to be doing a lot more. And the idea is to really get hyper-local and focus on these stories that aren't being told in a lot of places where most people think they don't want to go. So I'll just show you a little quick of what we're working on, and you'll be watching this in the months to come before we wrap up. Yeah. Thank you, thank you. So in closing, I would just like to say that I look forward to collaborating with many of you. And the biggest question I usually get is about security in a lot of, when you go into crisis areas. And I always say to everyone, less is more. Get great fixers who you trust. That's 1,000 times better than having a fleet of bulletproof SUVs. And no one's going to welcome you into your home if you're surrounded by people holding machine guns. And the one thing I will say, that when you want to go to these places and people tell you not to go, they tell you shouldn't go, what I always say is, I will never let your fear outweigh my curiosity. Thank you so much.